you study how property rights and water markets shape the way we manage shared resources. If you had to explain all of your work and that to a friend or someone in 2 or 3 sentences, how would you do it?
Well, in 2 or 3 sentences, for water specifically, my argument would be that to use, manage, and allocate water effectively, you have to capture incentives, and centralized controls don't do that. And so, if there are clear property rights, ownership to water, then those owners have incentives, and then parties can bargain among one another to deal with pollution issues over extraction or changes in allocation.
Yeah. So you
So
spent,
the political process does not do that.
yep. So you've spent a long time, decades, studying why people overuse these shared resources, fisheries, water. Was there a specific case or place that made you realize that property rights was the missing piece in all of this?
Yeah, actually, when I first started out at Texas A&M, I was actually astounded to read at this time, this wasn't that long ago, that oil firms competed for very valuable oil and natural gas, but mostly oil, and that they dug extra wells to basically steal their neighbors' oil. And so there was competitive theft, but moreover, in so doing, they vented all the underground pressures that you really need to drive the oil to the surface. One solution, the standard one you might think of on that case would be, well, let's have the state regulate production. Okay, well, what does that actually mean? Who is the state? What is the regulatory agency? In whose interests will they be operating? Small firms, large firms? I mean, there are a whole host of issues. And then what would be the motive of politicians? So there's kind of no clear predicting model that would suggest this is going to be efficient, even though it's worldwide, it's what's done, although it's because worldwide politicians, the state owns oil and gas, but not in Texas and most of the US. So, in any event, I began studying the fields, the oil and gas fields in Texas, and then tried to measure the losses and then how they were mitigated. And for the most part, they were mitigated by private negotiations because the parties owned the oil and gas that was being wasted.
Yeah, so what do you think is the most important thing happening in water policy or resource economics right now that's not really getting or is getting no attention and ought to be?
Well, in terms of water, it seems quite likely that with climate change, and climate change is going to happen, it's a global problem. So it doesn't really matter what we do, so long as China basically builds more coal-fired power plants than the rest of the world combined every year, we're going to have climate change. That being said, we're likely to have more drought and then more intense rainfall. And so you get these long periods. I think the it puts a great deal of pressure, especially in the Western US, to plan for that and to address it. And we do have a water rights system, and it's the most valuable farmland in the world. And we almost two-thirds of all of our food consumption comes from there, California and the West Coast. So it would be very important to recognize and use the property rights system we have, prior appropriation, appropriative rights, and rely upon those arrangements for a COSIN localized approach. That is localized groundwater basins and river systems. That's, I think, unlikely to be the approach that will be taken because the incentive of politicians, and just for example in California, the incentive of politicians in various groups will want to hijack that and mold water into their own desired patterns. But what that'll mean is the current owners won't have an incentive to comply. So I think you get a lot of waste and a lot of acrimony. So there you go.
Yeah.
That's a positive one.
Yeah. So
Okay.
this is, I mean, you talked a tiny bit about this, but in 10 years, if nothing really changes in how we're allocating water and the price of water globally, what is going to happen? What's going to happen in 10 years?
Things will change. The price of water will go up. It already is going up, especially as groundwater becomes more depleted. And if we have drought, and with more valuable water, it encourages efficiencies. It doesn't necessarily mean among private parties it encourages. So farmers will engage in irrigation systems that use less water. They'll plant less water intensive crops. They'll do all sorts of things to avoid wasting an asset that's increasingly costly. And we had a conference at the NBER 2 years ago, the National Bureau of Economic Research, on American agriculture in response to climate change. And of course, these are going to be samples of how agriculture in the US is responding. But there's a volume on that. And by and large, you see all sorts of responses. And so I think that's a very positive thing. I don't know if you'd see that in India or Mexico or any other, excuse me, place that is facing the same kind of water constraints, but where the water is owned by the state.
Yeah, so on a 1 to 5 scale, 5 being the most, how urgent do you think this problem of freshwater allocation is right now and why?
Today, I would, five being the most urgent.
Yes.
Okay. I'd say on a level of three. Now, why is that? Because for the last few years in the American West, we've had heavy snowfalls. This year, we did not. So reservoirs have been full of the battle over water between environmental groups and want more water flowing into ecosystems and into the ocean, and agriculture that wants more water for production, and cities that want more water for just people. Those battles have been mitigated a bit. We have 2 or 3 dry years, and that'll move right up to a five because
Yeah.
certain groups will want to take water anyway, it'll be a problem.
So, who is one scientist or in the environmental science or any related such field who I should interview after you?
Well, I guess it depends on what the problem with the environment is that there are natural resources. There's so many. There are fisheries. The problems are very similar, but there are fisheries and there's land use and timber and water and so forth. So, do you have a particular one in mind?
Not particularly. I think just the most interesting and would have a really good perspective on all of the work I've been doing. I mean, it's really up to you. I don't really have a particular.
Uh-huh. Let me give that some thought. Well, okay, so here's one on water, and he's likely to be available. It's Andrew Ayres, Ayres, at the University of Nevada, Reno, and he has a lot of good insights on Western water. In terms of fisheries, this guy may or may not be available. It's Ragnar Arneson, but he's in Iceland. I just don't know how. Let's see anybody else that quickly comes to mind on fisheries. Well, if I think of some, I can send you an email if you'd like.
Yes, that would be awesome.
That would be,
Yes.
and then forestry. I don't know. Then land use. The big battle in the West is between what goes on federal lands, which we call
Yes.
public lands, which is a misnomer because there's nothing public. It's just
Like,
competing interest groups,
mhm.
and on private lands. And I'm just finishing up a study on that right now. But
Yeah.
anyway, okay.
Yep. So one more parting question because I actually have to go some soon. So if every teenager on Earth had to hear one concluding sentence from you, what would it be?
One concluding sentence.
Yeah.
I'll be positive. That may not be, but that's a key thing. That's what private property and markets are very positive because they are. they are sort of forward looking. They are how can we all do better? And we're likely to do better. Everything else that you see in the papers and read from politicians and stuff is pretty doom and gloom. I think that's pretty terrible. So be positive.
Well, I have to run, but I very much appreciate your time coming to talk with me. And
Yeah, Ari.
yeah, I wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you so much.
Well, I will. Send me your email address if you want, and I'll give you some names.
Of course. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Ari.